My name is Clara. I'm 58 years old and I've been married to my husband David for what feels like forever, 33 years, if we're being precise. We've built a quiet life together in the suburbs of Maplewood, Ohio. Our children are grown now, scattered across different states. Their lives playing out mostly through photos on my phone and those precious Sunday calls that always feel too short. David works in corporate finance and has been loyal to the same company for nearly 2 decades. I used to be a school librarian surrounded by shelves of stories, but I retired early last year. These days, I fill my time with gardening, reading, and sometimes tagging along with David to charity functions, playing the role of the supportive wife. And dear friends, watching this, it was one of those charity dinners that changed everything for me. By the way, let me pause and ask, where are you watching from right now? I love knowing how far our stories travel. Drop it in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Our community is growing, and together, we're on our way to 500 subscribers. Your support means the world. Now back to that night. The invitation came from David's boss, Mr. Harrison Wells. I had heard his name for years, but never met him in person. David described him as sharp, traditional, a little distant, the kind of man who didn't waste time with small talk, but whose presence filled any room. The event was held at a private downtown club, one of those old-world places with dark wood panels, the faint sound of piano keys drifting through the air, and waiters who seemed to glide more than walk. I remember feeling unusually self-conscious. I had taken extra care with my hair, chosen a navy dress I hadn't worn in years, and even pulled out a lipstick that hadn't seen the light of day since our youngest graduated college. I couldn't explain why I tried so hard. It was just a dinner. But deep down, I wanted to feel visible again. When we arrived, David proudly introduced me to his colleagues. I smiled, shook hands, played the polite role, and tried not to let my mind wander as they talked shop. Then Harrison approached. He was taller than I expected, with silver-streaked hair, a clean-shaven jaw, and eyes that lingered a second longer than most. His voice was calm, measured, but carried a weight. "You must be Clara," he said, extending his hand. "David mentioned you were once a librarian. I've always thought librarians were keepers of secrets." I smiled a little, surprised by his remark. "Only the good ones," I teased. His laugh was low, genuine. And unlike the others, he didn't move on quickly. He stayed asking about the books I loved, the authors I admired, the little passions no one had asked me about in years. Later, when dinner began, I found myself seated between David and Harrison. The meal stretched on polite clinks of silverware business anecdotes floating around me. At one point, someone mentioned a local author I adored. I joined in, and Harrison turned toward me again, almost amused. "I had no idea you were so passionate about writing," he said. I opened my mouth to reply when I felt it, his hand brushing lightly against mine beneath the table. It could have been accidental, but it lingered just long enough to mean something. His fingers grazed my knuckles, warm, deliberate, before pulling away. I didn't dare look at him at once, though my heartbeat betrayed me, quick and restless. When I finally glanced sideways, he was focused on someone else, speaking calm as ever. Yet when his eyes returned to me moments later, there was a softness, a quiet acknowledgement. I excused myself to the restroom, then needing a moment to breathe to process. It wasn't attraction in the girlish sense, nor fear. It was subtler. I felt seen. When I returned, David was absorbed in conversation, while Harrison sat with a glass of red wine. As I settled back into my chair, his hand brushed mine again, this time less by chance. No words were exchanged. None were needed. But deep down, I knew something had shifted that night. Quiet, unexpected, like the first page of a book I hadn't even realized I was waiting to read. The days that followed the dinner looked ordinary on the surface. David slipped back into his familiar rhythm, early mornings, with coffee in a travel mug, quick pecks on the cheek, long hours at the office. I filled my days with tending my roses, leafing through old photo albums, and strolling through the farmer's market on Wednesdays. Yet no matter how many distractions I created, I couldn't shake the memory of Harrison's hand brushing mine, the weight of his glance, not casual, not accidental, but curious, like he was actually seeing me. It had been so long since anyone looked at me that way. Not out of duty, not out of habit, but with genuine interest. I never doubted David's love. But love after 30 years becomes gentle, steady, wrapped in routines. Harrison's attention reminded me of something I thought I had lost, what it feels like to be seen as a woman, not just a wife. A few days later, David came home, loosening his tie, casual as ever. Harrison's hosting a little gathering this weekend. A few couples from the office. He said he really enjoyed talking with you. Clara insisted you come. I tried to keep my expression calm, but heat rushed into my cheeks. Did he? I asked, trying to sound indifferent. David didn't notice. He simply nodded and wandered into the kitchen to warm up leftovers. That Saturday, we drove out to Harrison's home, a beautiful colonial-style house tucked among trees just outside the city. Spring was in the air, cool and fragrant, with soft jazz spilling through the open windows. About a dozen people mingled on the stone patio glasses, in hand laughter, drifting beneath the evening sky. Harrison welcomed us at the door. Clara, he said with a warmth that caught me off guard, I'm glad you made it. As he guided us inside, his hand rested briefly on the small of my back, subtle, fleeting, but deliberate. My body felt it before my mind could catch up. As the evening stretched on, I found myself once again near him. We stood by the fire pit in the backyard, the flames crackling softly between us. David had drifted off with a cluster of men, lost in shop talk. Harrison handed me a glass of white wine. You seemed a little distant earlier, he said quietly. Everything all right? I hesitated, unwilling to confess how often I'd replayed our last encounter. Just thinking, I admitted at last. Sometimes I feel like I've turned invisible since retiring. He studied me with a stillness that unnerved me. You're far from invisible, Clara. The way he said my name felt like a secret whispered in the dark. I turned toward the fire, its warmth brushing my face. You're kind to say that. It's not kindness, he replied softly. It's the truth. For a moment, silence settled between us, broken only by the crackle of firewood. Then gently, deliberately, he reached for my hand. This time it wasn't accidental. His thumb traced slow, unhurried circles across my skin. The gesture wasn't demanding, wasn't forceful. It simply was. I shouldn't. I began, but the words faltered. You haven't done anything wrong, he said calmly. And neither have I. I didn't pull away. I didn't lean closer either. I just let the moment hang there, heavy with unspoken meaning, scented with smoke and jasmine in the air. Then someone called out from the patio and we stepped apart, the spell broken but not gone. Something in me had shifted again, deeper this time. It wasn't just about being noticed. It was about feeling awake, as though a part of me that had been sleeping for years was quietly stirring. When David and I left later that night, Harrison's eyes found mine once more. He didn't speak, but the glance was enough acknowledgement, without guilt, without pressure. Only understanding. On the drive home, David hummed along to the radio, perfectly content, and I stared out at the moonlit road, my chest tight with something I couldn't name. I didn't know where this new path was leading, but I knew I couldn't pretend it didn't exist. The week that followed felt different, as though the rhythm of my life had quietly shifted a half step. Outwardly, nothing had changed. David still sat at the breakfast table each morning with the paper spread before him. I still folded laundry while old jazz hummed softly from the kitchen radio. But inside me, something was moving. Was it unraveling, or perhaps unfolding? I couldn't quite tell. Harrison hadn't called, hadn't written. Why would he? There were no promises, no exchanged numbers, no words at all. Just a touch, a glance, a quiet energy that somehow lingered long after the night had ended. Then came Friday. Over dinner, David mentioned casually that Harrison had invited him to a client dinner downtown. It's mostly for appearances, he said between bites of roast chicken. Spouses are welcome, but I told him you probably wouldn't want to sit through another night of business talk. I didn't answer at once. My eyes rested on the small candle, flickering at the center of the table, its flame bending in the air. There was a question hidden there, unspoken. Finally, I said, "What if I did want to go?" David looked up surprised. "You sure I could use a night out?" And so, 2 nights later, I found myself in a deep burgundy dress, a silk scarf brushing against my shoulders, walking into a quiet upscale restaurant with low lights and polished mahogany walls. Harrison stood near the wine display, speaking to someone. But when his gaze found me, his expression shifted. There was no immediate smile, just a pause, a steady look, and then the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth. "Clara," he said once we were seated, "you look elegant." I thanked him softly, careful not to linger on the words with David right beside me. Yet something unspoken was alive between us, a current invisible to everyone else. Dinner moved slowly. Conversations spun around quarterly results, market shifts, client expectations. I nodded, sipped my wine, but most of my awareness rested on the space between Harrison and me. There were no accidental touches this time, no gestures that might raise suspicion. Just restrained, elegant quiet. But beneath it, a spark glowed steady. After dessert, David excused himself to take a business call. Harrison leaned closer. Once we were alone, his voice lower than before. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure either, I admitted. He studied my face carefully. You haven't stopped thinking about it. It wasn't a question, and I didn't deny it. I've been married most of my life, I said softly. I don't want to be the kind of woman who gets swept into something foolish. He nodded, and for a moment I thought he might retreat. But instead his words landed gently. I don't think you're foolish, Clara. I think you've just been quiet for too long. The sentence struck something deep inside me, a part I hadn't even known was aching. I'm not asking for anything, he continued. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. But if you ever want to talk, truly, talk, I'd like that. No pressure. Just truth. I didn't answer right away. But I didn't look away either. Moments later, David returned, cheerful, oblivious. The evening wound down, we exchanged goodbyes. Harrison shook David's hand with professional warmth. When he turned to me, his touch lasted no longer than etiquette allowed. Yet his eyes told another story, one I couldn't ignore. On the drive home, David spoke about projections, budgets, plans for the next quarter. I watched the city lights streak across the window, golden ribbons cutting through my thoughts. I felt suspended between two lives, the steady one I had lived so faithfully, and the new one that had only just begun to breathe beneath the surface. When we pulled into our driveway, David squeezed my hand. Thanks for coming tonight, he said with a smile. It meant a lot, I smiled back. But inside, my heart was far from settled. That night, for the first time in years, I lay awake deep into the night, not from worry, but from wondering. Friends, let me ask you, if you were in Clara's place, would you have gone to that dinner? Or would you have stayed home? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to subscribe. We're on our way to 500 subscribers, and your support truly keeps this community alive. Then came 2 weeks. Outwardly, life continued as usual. Grocery runs, weekend brunch with my neighbor, and afternoons spent sorting through spring decorations in the attic. Yet beneath the ordinary, something persistent tugged at me. Harrison hadn't reached out. He didn't need to. That dinner, that final exchange of words, had left its mark. What I carried wasn't just about him, it was about me. About the woman I had quietly tucked away beneath years of habit, loyalty, and time. One morning, as David hummed out of tune while shaving in the bathroom, I stood at the kitchen sink, staring at my reflection in the window above it. Not just looking, seeing. My face wasn't the same as it had been at 30 or 40. But there was a fullness now, something honest lived in. Beautiful in its own way. That afternoon my phone buzzed. A message from Harrison. I'm headed to the gallery opening you mentioned. Saturday at 4. You once said the Monet exhibit always moved you. If you happen to be there too, I'd enjoy walking through the canvases with you. He hadn't asked to meet. He hadn't even said my name. Just an offering, a choice. I stared at the screen for a long time, finger hovering above the glass. That Saturday, I didn't tell David where I was going. He was busy in the garage, muttering over tools and a leaky pipe. I drove downtown, parked near the museum, and walked up the stone steps, feeling like someone both brand new and very old at once. The Monet exhibit was softly lit, golden frames glowing under track lights. Brushstrokes swirled in impressionistic blur. I lingered in front of water lilies, letting the colors settle something deep within me. Then I saw him. Harrison stood near a window, hands folded loosely, not searching, not restless, simply waiting. When our eyes met, he smiled, not with expectation, with recognition. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I wasn't sure I admit it." "I wasn't sure either," he replied. We walked then through rooms, through colors, through silence that spoke louder than words. At one point, we stopped before a misty morning garden. His voice broke the quiet. "I know you love your husband. I'm not here to threaten that. But I wanted to remind you, you're still allowed to feel more." I swallowed, unsteady. "I wasn't looking for this. I didn't expect it." "I know," he said softly. "That's what makes it real." I turned toward him. "So what now?" He shrugged gently. "That's not up to me." There was no kiss, no grand gesture. Only a connection fragile and tender, the kind of thing you don't rush to name. As we stepped into the afternoon sunlight, streaming across tall windows, I brushed his hand with mine. This time, it was me who lingered. "I'm not sure where this leaves me," I whispered. "Maybe not knowing is okay," he replied. And somehow, it was. I drove home with the windows down, the spring air tangling through my hair. I didn't feel as though I'd cheated. I didn't feel as though I had betrayed. I felt awakened, alive. That night, I sat beside David as he read the paper. For the first time in a long while, I really looked at him. And instead of wanting to speak about Harrison, I wanted to speak about us, about the things we stopped noticing, about who we once were, and what still might be waiting if we dared to reach for it. Because sometimes the most surprising part of being seen by someone else is how it teaches you to finally see yourself. In the days after the exhibition, Linda lived in a state of limbo. During the day, she still took care of the house, went to the market, and chatted with the neighbors, like a wife, a normal woman. But when night fell, when the house was quiet, her heart echoed with the echoes of the eyes and words that stirred up the deepest part of her. One late afternoon, while folding clothes in the bedroom, Linda heard Mark calling from downstairs. "Linda, this weekend the company is organizing a conference at the beach. Do you want to come with me?" That sentence pulled her back to reality. The late afternoon sunlight shone through the window, illuminating the purple scarf still hanging on the chair, the same scarf she wore the first time she met Gregory at the company dinner. She paused her hand, stopping on the pile of shirts. Two voices called out in her head. One was Mark, the one who had been with her through so many years, the safety, the familiarity. On one side was Gregory, new, uncertain, but full of life. That evening, as Mark sat reading the newspaper as usual, Linda sat beside him, her heart pounding. She took a deep breath and said softly, "Mark, have you ever thought that we haven't really talked to each other for a long time?" Mark lowered the newspaper, slightly surprised. "What do you mean?" This was the moment. Linda knew that the path ahead depended on the words she was about to say. She didn't intend to confess everything, but she couldn't keep quiet anymore. Outside, the night wind gently stirred the leaves, as if urging her to choose to remain silent as before, or to enter into a conversation that could change her life. Linda looked at Mark for a long time. Before her eyes was not only the husband who had been with her through many rainy and sunny seasons, but also a mirror reflecting the parts of herself that had been dormant. She said slowly, "I don't want us to just live next to each other like two shadows. I want to feel, to share, to live with you again." Mark was silent. His eyes were slightly confused. But in that look, Linda saw a familiar light, the light of the day they first fell in love, of the nights sitting on the porch, just listening to the wind blowing. There were no flowery promises, no dramatic explosions, just a nod, a hand gently placed on hers. And Linda knew that moment was her decision not to run away, not to search outside, but to choose to return, to cultivate what had made her heart flutter in the first place. And Gregory, he would still be a gentle memory, a peace that had awakened her. Linda did not deny his existence, but she knew he had only come to remind her that even after passing through youth, women still have the right to feel, the right to love, and the right to be true to themselves. That night, Linda sat next to Mark on the familiar sofa, but this time she felt at peace. No more torment, no more confusion. There was just a woman who had just awakened and learned to look back at happiness right in her own home. Dear friends, the story ends here, but I believe that its echoes will remain in everyone's heart. Sometimes we need someone outside to look back at ourselves and then realize that the precious things that were never lost. I'm very curious, where are you guys watching this story from? Please leave a comment to share. And if you find the story touching, you don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can soon reach the milestone of 500 subscribers. That will be a great motivation for me to continue bringing you emotional stories like this.